So there's a lot of problems right now. There is still the coronavirus, which is pretty much as bad as it's ever been here in the U.S. because the response has been pretty poor. And so 1,000 people a day are dying of that. It's spiking in a lot of different states. The economic fallout from the coronavirus is still ongoing, and the unemployment rate is extremely high, which has led to many, many people losing their jobs. And when they lose their jobs here in the U.S., that means that they lose their health care. And when you lose your job because there's a virus out there, and you don't have health care, when you get that virus, that means that even if you recover from it, you are likely to be in massive medical debt. And so that's a fun American problem. There's the George Floyd killings and the associated protests and the lack of reforms or police accountability that has happened after that, the racial tensions. There's still climate change, that's still happening. Income inequality is spiking as the economic stimulus for coronavirus has gone disproportionately to wealthy corporations, and people like Jeff Bezos have added tens of billions of dollars to their wealth, while other people, poorer people, middle class people, have had to reach into savings in order to stay above water as they lose revenue from the economic situation. A lot of things have been happening. But there is one issue in particular which stands tall above the rest as the single biggest threat to life on this planet, and America in particular. And that issue is that there are certain stone or metal pieces that are at times, 60 or 100 or maybe 200 years old, which were erected as monuments to people from the past. And some of those pieces of stone have been taken down by certain people. And those pieces of stone, unlike healthcare or having enough money to put food on the table or making sure that the air is clean so that people can breathe and they don't get cancer, those pieces of stone represent a core. They're kind of like a core organ at the heart of every American. And so when they're toppled, America itself and as well as all the Americans living in it are as good as dead. So we're like kind of walking zombies at this point. And so this is something that our commander-in-chief has been talking a lot about in terms of its threat and its potential to just mass carnage, completely destroy the entire foundation for American society. And so I thought that I would talk about that as well. And so when it comes to my opinion on statues, which I didn't even know I really had one because it's such a stupid issue until now, but I have an opinion on statues. So I'm going to give my opinion on statues because that's what the president wants to talk about, and that's what the culture war is going to be fought on. The Civil War was fought, across the Mason-Dixon line, and the culture war is going to be fought on the history of the Civil War and the stones that were placed in response to it, largely. So a lot of the statues are statues of Confederate generals and people from the Confederacy. The Confederacy being the people that we went to war with because they wanted to keep enslaving people to exploit their labor for generation after generation. And the North went to war with them and got rid of slavery. But the South still loves the Confederacy, and they want to put up statues of them. And actually, most of the statues of the Confederacy were put up not during or slightly after the Civil War. They were put up in like the 1910s, like the early part of the 20th century, in order to lock in Jim Crow laws. Like as Reconstruction failed and as the Klan and white supremacy spread throughout the South again, they were put there to lock in Jim Crow and remind black people who's in charge. And so I'm going to put this graph on the screen here. You can see most of the statues went up in the early part of the 1900s, and then the second big spike happened to coincide in the 50s and 60s, which is during the Civil Rights Movement. And so these were put up hastily and cheaply as a way to counter the things that Martin Luther King was saying and the other civil rights leaders, which were in a nutshell, we want to be treated like everybody else. All people are the same. We want to have the same rights as all of you. And the white people who were objectively racist and said things like, "We're white supremacists," they also said, here's our heroes. We're going to put these up in order to rub your nose in it. And so that's how the Confederate statues were put up. And the fact that so many people are defending them as a badge of American history that just needs to be remembered and honored is pretty gross to me. But that's the history of how they got there. It wasn't people in the 1850s putting them up because they were talking about states' rights. So those are Confederate statues. I think that it's great they're coming down because they are monuments to racist, slave-holding segregationists who wanted to fight a war in order to keep people in chains. And their monuments were put up in order to remind those people that after they got out of their chains, they're still never quite going to be free, and they always are going to be playing second fiddle in the slums. And it's embarrassing that people don't understand that. Now, there are other statues which are more nuanced, and these are the ones that President Trump and the right wing like to point to the most, or at least the mainstream right wing, because the Confederacy got a little bit too much baggage, and these ones you can play ignorant enough to say that they were great people. And these are people like George Washington, who did some good things. I think it's good that he helped win the Revolutionary War, because despite of all its flaws, early America was still a step up in terms of civilization and in terms of freedoms from what was happening under England for the colonies. Now, there was still 100 different problems, and I think people could actually name those themselves. But that was a good thing, and so I think it's good he did that. On the other hand, he did own 123 slaves, which I would argue is too many slaves, for sure. He also was called the Village Destroyer by the Iroquois because he destroyed their villages, and it was just a little thing that he did on the side. And I would argue that any one of those two things would be enough to make you not a good enough person to be viewed as a hero, and to have statues of you put out. Now, I don't think that people from hundreds of years ago should be judged with through the same lens as today, as in values increase over time, and so somebody that was progressive in ancient Greece might have really helped civilization in a lot of different ways, but still wasn't going to be woke on gay rights issues today. He might be a mega bigot on things like that. That doesn't mean that there aren't people that are ahead of their time that helped in that way. And there is nuance. And so I think that's important to acknowledge, and I wouldn't say that every paragraph written about George Washington in history textbooks has to be all the terrible things that he did. I think those all should be in there because it reflects American history more accurately than what has been taught. But you can put in the good things that he did about crossing the Delaware and, his battle strategies or whatever also. Just represent the whole history, but that doesn't mean we should be putting up monuments to the man. And so I think they should be taken down, maybe put in museums as an actual educational device. And then there are other people. Andrew Jackson, who's President Trump's favorite president, which is very telling, who's the guy who passed the Indian Removal Act, which led to the Trail of Tears, which he explicitly went against the Supreme Court's orders in order to remove those Indians who actually had rightful claims to their land, according to John Marshall in the Supreme Court. He didn't care, send them on the way, pass the Indian Removal Act, and it was just another little thing that he did. We're also reminded that he was a patriot and a Democrat, and a few other things that are good about him. If there are good things about Andrew Jackson, I can't think of any of them. Keep him in the history books. Put all the other crap that he did in there also. I'd say take him off the 20. I think they are going to take him off the 20 and put Tubman on there, but they keep delaying it because Trump loves Andrew Jackson so much, and we don't need to, get people too excited too quickly with too many concessions about putting actually good people on America's money. But there shouldn't be statues for that guy either. They should be taken down, put in a museum. Now, there's other ones like Thomas Jefferson. I kind of like Thomas Jefferson, honestly. He was better than the other founding fathers in a lot of ways. He was very insightful. He wrote the Virginia Statute on Religious Freedom, which which was kind of the foundation for the First Amendment, which led to the separation of church and state, which was actually a huge thing and made America unique in the world, and I think is one of the best parts of the Constitution. He he was kind of actually agnostic. He was the most non-religious person of the 18th century that I could think of. He was very insightful on states' rights versus federal rights. On the other hand, he did have 600 slaves. Again, far too many slaves. And impregnated one of them, Sally Hemings, 6 times, presumably raped her, because you cannot have consent with a slave. And so that's a terrible thing. So I would say that he shouldn't get a statue either, or at least in public spaces. And keep him in the history books, say the good things, get rid of the bad things, but tell the whole history. And I think that's what people should do in general. Now, that being said, there are certain statues which have been targeted for being taken down, including Abraham Lincoln ones, or at least Abraham Lincoln on Mount Rushmore, which I would say leave up Abraham Lincoln statue. He was definitely not perfect. I know he had some bad things against Native Americans also, but there was one main thing that he did, and that was, win the Civil War and end slavery. And so I think that's good enough that the statue of Abraham Lincoln is not the same thing as a statue of a segregationist, even though he was very flawed in other ways as well. But I'm open to being convinced otherwise with regards to that one. There are other ones, like I guess Hans Christian Heg, they took down a statue of in Wisconsin. He was an abolitionist who had a very strong history. I think that's a bad idea, and I wouldn't support it. And I think you should be uplifting voices, even if they happen to be, white men of the 18th century or 19th century that were ahead of their time and led to the actual good things in the country. So statues of them, I think, are fine. I think they should put up more statues of people that history has forgotten, mostly people from indigenous or black communities that were poor and, took the brunt of America's imperialism rather than being the, pretty white face of it, or the kind of strange looking white face with a wig on top in terms of our founding fathers. Those people should have their statues too, but I would argue that you can leave up the abolitionist ones also. But in general, the fact that Trump is making this his main issue at a time when the world is crumbling around him is a type of virtue signaling culture warriorism that the worst actors and the most narcissistic people in Hollywood or on social media that the right likes to point to as social justice warrior-y, types that are just focused on nonsense issues in order to get people riled up. Trump is doing that times 100, and it's especially embarrassing given what's happening and what his actual position is. So, that's what I think about statues, an issue that I actually don't care about because they are just pieces of rock. So.